Good afternoon and welcome to our episode on air quality in partnership with Equans. My name is Sophie Hooper and I am the IWFM's Head of Policy and Research. I am joined by a fantastic panel who between them have many years of experience in managing air quality and or dealing with the impacts of it on people's health. Before I let them introduce themselves, I want to provide some brief context about why we are here today. And air quality is never really off the agenda. Even yesterday, Friends of the Earth published a research report headlining how 1 in 4 neighborhoods suffer from multiple forms of pollution. And these findings were not from some distant land. They were very much looking at the UK, with many places in London actually being pollution hotspots. And there were some other places as well. You should not feel left out. While the report was very much focused on the impact of the natural environment, it really didn't miss the emphasis of the broader impact on people and people's health. Now, our guest, Dr. Katie Knight, will talk about specific health impacts, but from a political debate around ULEZ, for example, and this new report, we know that air pollution is linked to 25,000 deaths annually in England, making it the most significant environmental threat to public health. And what can we do to contribute to solutions? And especially, what can we do as FMs to make sure indoor air pollution is reduced? And what would our business case be to do so? Our own research of return on workplace investment highlighted the importance of indoor air quality as a contributor to improved productivity. And our panel discussion will no doubt touch on many of these points. After introduction, Dr. Katie Knight will give a short presentation and then we'll dive straight into the discussion. Now, I would really encourage you as the audience to post your questions throughout the session. I'll try to weave in your questions within our panel discussion if it's really topical at the time. Otherwise, we'll leave some time, we'll set some time aside towards the end to answer any questions that we may not have answered. Can you please put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat? And if you want to ask your question anonymously, you can do so. Before we get into the presentation, may I ask each of you from the panel to introduce yourself and share what focus on air quality you really have. Lewis, may I start with you, please?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, and thanks for joining the call. So my name is Lewis Chenery, and I'm the current head of environment and sustainability at Equans UK and Ireland. I oversee and support 2 key business units within Equans. The first one is our facilities management division, where we work with a really large and diverse range of public and private sector clients, each with their own unique sustainability goals and priorities, air quality being one of them. And the second business unit that I support is our digital and energy division, where we're leading a variety of projects and initiatives primarily focused under the decarbonisation and digitalisation banner. But air quality kind of runs through both of those parts to some degree. Thanks.
Thank you. Greg?
Hello, brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. As you can see, my name's Greg Davis. I'm Director of Market Development at an independent health and safety consultancy called Assurity Consulting. Background is as a microbiologist. My qualifications are in that, and spent a number of years working for the Public Health Laboratory Service and in a big white suit making vaccines. That sort of collided my microbiological and really the compliance side of what I now do. And I've spent the last 30 years working for Assurity Consulting, of which a large part of what we do is monitoring air quality in operational buildings and really looking at the performance of the workplace environment. In addition to that, I've spent a number of years as a member of the IWFM Sustainability Special Interest Group and been involved in the survey for I think I'm on about 9 or 10 surveys. Sophie, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you to all who contributed to this year's survey as well. We've got a good body of evidence that we're now working on, ready for the launch of that report. I also currently chair the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management's London branch, where again air quality in both those is obviously a topic that's regularly discussed.
Thank you, Greg. And last but not least, Dr. Katie Knight.
Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Knight. I'm a paediatric emergency medicine consultant by background. My major interest, apart from paediatrics, is in sustainable healthcare and the health effects of climate change. So I'm currently completing a master's in climate justice. I've done a lot of work both locally within my trust, which is North Middlesex Hospital, which has Equans as a partner, hence my involvement in this webinar mostly, and also with the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. I've led a lot of their climate change work on a national basis.
Thank you all. Katie, we may as well take it away immediately. You should have control now over the slides.
Fantastic, thank you. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about air pollution and the effects it has on human health. So as we know, air isn't just empty space, it's filled with a mix of gases and unfortunately has pollutants in there as well. And where the air quality is poor, it basically means we're breathing in things that our bodies just aren't meant to handle. So in these pictures, the smog that you can see hanging over those cities is sort of a hazy mist, but it's basically a soup of particles and tiny droplets. And the main one you can probably guess is carbon or soot from burning fossil fuels. So things like gas used to heat homes and petrol and diesel, which power our cars. But there's also going to be chemicals, dust, building waste, microbes, all of which can have different and harmful effects on the body. And some of those are immediate effects. Some of those will be long-term. So the World Health Organization talks about pollution in terms of PM10 and PM2.5. And that's just basically a way of categorizing the different size particles. So PM stands for particulate matter, and the number is the size of the particle in microns. So for context, a grain of sand is about 100 microns in size. So PM10 and PM2.5 are really, really tiny and invisible to the naked eye. So your PM10 particles, which are 10 microns, they can get into our lungs, but not really any further. And those include things like pollen and dust from construction, so concrete and brick dust, road pollution like particles from car tires, which can cause irritation to the lungs and make conditions like asthma and bronchitis much, much worse. What we really worry about more and more evidence is building is the PM2.5 particles. So these particles are so tiny that not only do we breathe them in, they get past the natural defenses that we have in our lungs. So like the hairs in our nose and the mucus, which lines our respiratory tract, which is meant to trap particles. And those particles can actually go into the bloodstream and make their way to any organ in the body. And I literally mean any organ. So PM2.5 has even been found in the placenta, so it can affect a baby before it's born. So the major sources of PM2.5 are again from burning fossil fuels, vehicle emissions, chemicals released as a side of combustion, but also things like industrial processes, manufacturing plants releasing chemicals and heavy metals, acids, volatile organic compounds, and some of those might be substances which can cause cancer. Air pollution sometimes gets called the silent or invisible killer, as most people have no idea about the level of toxic substances they're breathing in every single day, especially if they live or work in a busy city. So how does PM2.5 affect the body? So we've known for quite a long time that the risk of heart attacks and strokes is higher in people who live in polluted areas, which accounts for a lot of the excess deaths associated with pollution that Sophie was talking about earlier. So what's actually going on with PM2.5 is those particles pass through the lungs, they get into the blood vessels and cause inflammation inside them. Inflamed blood vessels are really difficult for blood to flow through, so clots can form. When clot forms, the oxygen to an organ is cut off. So that's what's happening basically in a heart attack or a stroke. Within the lungs themselves, PM2.5 causes irritation, swelling, can increase the mucus that you have there and can lead to long-term structural changes in the lungs as well. It can also stop your immune cells working so well, meaning that you get chest infections, which are more common and more difficult to treat. That's obviously really bad for anybody who has asthma or bronchitis, but even for people who don't have those conditions, when you're exposed to PM2.5 long-term, you have a high risk of lung cancer, even for people who don't smoke. When children, being a pediatrician, I really care about this as well. when children are exposed to PM2.5, this actually stunts their lung development and can cause them to develop chronic lung conditions. So what's not mentioned on this slide here are the other possible effects. So we know now there's evidence that PM2.5 affects gut health and can affect the healthy balance of healthy bacteria in the gut. It can affect the pancreas, meaning that diabetes is more likely to develop. And there's even been a link between dementia and PM2.5. So Alzheimer's can be more common in people living in polluted areas. I also wanted to touch briefly on indoor air quality, which has been slightly historically neglected side of the topic. So far from being protected from the outdoor air quality, we can actually sometimes be at greater risk of PM2.5 inhalation inside. So if a building's poorly designed and there's no mitigations in place. So as well as all the outdoor pollutants that I've mentioned, we've got pollutants might come from building materials themselves. So paints and varnishes and things giving off volatile organic compounds. We've got things which are present in older buildings like asbestos and lead-based paints. VOCs can also come from furniture and upholstery and cleaning products. Then we've got our heating, creating the fossil fuel byproducts as well. And especially relevant to us in hospital, bacteria, viruses, fungal spores can circulate as well. So, and I have to say, even in healthcare settings, we really only started discussing this in the aftermath of COVID, when obviously air quality became a big issue in terms of infection control. So that really brings an end to what I wanted to say as a very brief overview about air quality and health. I've just put a few headlines on this page just to really drive home the fact that there's certain population groups which are really at risk from this. Those include children, the elderly, those with chronic conditions. And really these substances are finding their way into every single part of the human body. So it's up to us to do whatever we can to try and mitigate these effects, because the more evidence that comes out, the more clear it is that our health is being really damaged, both immediately and for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you for your presentation. You very clearly outlined what the health impact is from air quality, and I feel a little bit more incentivized to care about this much more than possibly I do at the moment. Really, let's explore a little. So we've looked at why this is important, but let's explore a little bit more about air quality in the workplace and its impact before we move to the role of FMs in improving it. So when it comes to the workplace, why is air quality important in the workplace? Lewis, you've gone off mute, so you're
I think, yeah, I mean, there's various reasons why it's important in the workplace. Katie set out why it's massively important for, you know, from a clinical perspective. It's very much linked to development and healthcare, but within a kind of public sector, private sector perspective, there's a lot of onus on things like productivity, employee well-being, you know, building satisfaction. That is important to all ages and ranges. If you think of, say, you're looking for a new job, for example, one of the things that you want to know is whether your employer values your well-being, and air quality definitely plays into that perspective. So yeah, massively important topic, but yeah, for kind of different reasons.
Thank you, Lewis. It's interesting that you mentioned that about people becoming more aware about new employers, looking for new employers and asking questions around that. We've picked that up elsewhere. Greg, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it has. I mean, there are other surveys and information available, but the one that sprung to my mind is the latest Leishman Index, and for a period of years now, with regards to that, air quality has been in the top 10 of factors that are important to employees. There's always been a split between those that see it as important, which is typically 60% plus, to those that are satisfied for it, which can be as low as 40%. Part of that is historic, and I know we've been monitoring air quality in buildings in terms of dust, bacteria, gases, temperature, relative humidity, airflow velocities, etc. As I said, for the last 30 years, got millions of bits of data on that, and the information was only ever used if anybody complained. It was never used proactively. It was something that was just brought out, if you like, as a protection, say, well, no, our air quality is good, and really only came to light primarily through COVID, although there were elements of this happening, particularly with ambient air, outdoor air pollution, but talking specifically about the workplace, when people started to ask questions, and now it's been seen as much more of a positive. And with the whole well-being agenda as well, we've got all sorts of issues around financial well-being, nutrition, healthy eating, etc. Air quality forms part of that. It's one of those areas where still very few organisations have a policy on their air quality and what they should be looking to achieve, or what is their proposition for employees. Lewis mentioned about talent retention and recruitment, and it is a vital part. There are questions people are now asking. So I think organisations are now identifying that this is something that we do need. We do need good, robust information on.
Yeah, I think the other thing to add on that as well, especially for our kind of commercial clients, it's if they're underpinned by kind of ESG ratings and credentials that they have to maintain, and they are an office-based company, there's actually very little that they can do in terms of differentiation. So a good workplace environment, and one that does prioritize, manage, monitor, review around air quality, can give that kind of lead above.
Thank you. You mentioned an interesting point there around environmental awareness, or sustainability goals. Often that is part of the conversation, the whole sustainability element, but there is a little bit of a juxtaposition, isn't there, between driving up net zero versus driving up internal air quality and well-being, because it links to potentially greater emissions. How do you manage that with your clients?
I'm happy to give a go at that, but I guess that is a really, really difficult thing, isn't it? The ventilation perhaps versus filtration. So most modern buildings are kind of, I suppose, designed to be airtight to some degree. So in order to adequately ventilate and filter these spaces, it's more emissions associated with it. So it's a real kind of juxtaposition to kind of get that balance right. So I guess Greg might have some more thoughts on that.
I think it is an interesting one. I mean, Katie talked about this with regards to specifically PM 2.5s, and we've seen the World Health Organization reduce their guidance on this right the way down to a very low level. But the fact is 99% of the world's population are living in an environment that does not meet those targets. Bearing in mind they are targets and something to achieve in the UK through the Environment Act 2021 is starting to look and challenge those. I think with regards to the overall environment, the two do knit together. Small scale combustion and road transport are two of the major causes of particulate matter. So if we can find an alternative to fossil fuels that reduces our carbon, it'll also reduce the amount of particles that are being produced, but still provide the heating we need. Has got to be the ultimate goal. But there is going to be a trade-off in certain situations. If you're in a big urban environment, the quality of filtration on the air you're going to need and the overall air quality management is going to be greater than in an agricultural area or a more rural area, for example, just because of the ambient air, the outdoor air is like. So there may be a trade-off in the short term, and indeed we saw that with COVID, where ventilation systems were being run 24/7 to act as a diluent, which was great from a health perspective, but not quite so good from a carbon management perspective.
Great.
Lewis, you had your hand up. Did you want?
That was an accidental one. Sorry.
No worries. It's very encouraging to hear from you both that the people that you work with are very much engaged, and there is quite a bit of awareness. When we've previously had roundtables around this area, we saw that actually more needs to be done to raise awareness across this area. Do you think there are any particular aspects or what aspects of air quality are not necessarily yet fully understood amongst people and organisations, or are there any standout sectors?
I'll go again. I guess Katie touched on that when she outlined that at the start, really. There's still the conversation around the long-term health impacts around exposure to air quality, both outdoor and indoor, is still not recognised properly. We as a population, we spend, as Brits, over 90% of our time indoors, breathing in and out all of those constantly. And we're not putting the health connection to that as well. We look at things like diet and smoking, but actually the air that we breathe is all the time. So I think that's one of the things that connection's not been kind of made properly yet as well. The other thing around, which Katie also touched on as well, is around the impact of things like VOCs from the cleaning materials, the paints that we use, the building materials that we use in our projects as well. I think air quality is often perceived as this kind of outdoor issue, but actually a lot of the things and the more exposure that we have is indoor. So these procurement decisions that do have an impact on indoor air quality and the air that we breathe.
Thank you for that. Katie and Gregor, actually, Katie, I would like to bring you in. What more do you think could be done to drive greater awareness around this topic?
It's a difficult one, Sophie. I mean, I think what I do have to say is that the general awareness of how air quality affects health, I would say, is very low, even amongst healthcare professionals. So the evidence is just about building out there about how bad it is. And, you know, every new bit of evidence which shows, oh, it's PM2.5 has been detected in the placenta, it's been detected in the brains of babies. It's terrifying information for us, but we don't yet not have the full picture of what that has implications for over the course of a whole person's whole life. We're only really starting to scratch the surface. And I just want to highlight that we don't know of a safe level of 2.5 exposure. The World Health Organization has to set a limit because there has to be targets, but that's not saying that that level of exposure is a safe level for any human to be exposed to. I think that what's going to drive change really is a greater awareness amongst people about the long-term health implications. So it's a real piece of public health work. And things like visible air quality monitors, which can actually start to give you real-time feedback on the stuff that you're being exposed to in the air, is going to start driving some conversations. You know, so we've been having conversations recently at our trust about, can we have air pollution monitors outside the ambulance bay, where we know ambulances are sat there idling. Those paramedic crews are exposed to a lot of fumes, but they're not aware of that because it's invisible, right? So if there's a visual display on the wall which can actually show that air quality right now in this exact area is very poor, and this is what it's going to mean for your health, please can you not idle the ambulances, or can we increase the ventilation somehow? That's going to start driving change, I think.
Thank you, Katie. You mentioned something interesting around the WHO and the levels that they're looking at. There isn't much legislation in this area, actually. Do the panel have any more thoughts around the need for more legislation around this? Greg?
Yeah, the Environment Act 2021, I suppose, is a start from a UK perspective. They were from the WHO 2005 guidelines. The updates were significant. NO2 came down by 75%. Particles, PM2.5s from 10 to 5. Yeah, if you look elsewhere, I think America notionally has got a guideline of about 9. Europe, a lot of Europe is 20. I know Scotland's slightly lower, but our ambition, even in the Environment Act, is 10 micrograms per cubic meter by 2040 everywhere, with a 35% reduction, and that comes back to ambition. It's a start. we have, we have seen change, I suppose. If you look at sulfur dioxide levels compared to 1990 levels in 1990, we're 90% less than we were then, which doesn't necessarily, again, Katie's point as what is a safe level, but they are coming down. I think we just need a bit more of a concerted effort. Currently, as I've highlighted, just some of those targets are quite variable across jurisdictions. So I think it's a matter of continuing to look at the evidence we are getting, both from a health and both from an environmental perspective, and looking to meet those and match those.
Thank you, Greg. We've had a question come in from Heath Taylor. Given that indoor air quality is invisible, is there a need for public places to display their indoor air quality rating, much like Food Standards Agency hygiene rating, where public can see an organization's hygiene rating? I mean, that would possibly be an incentive. Any thoughts to that?
I mean, I think that sounds fantastic, but I think it would have to be live air quality condition in an ideal situation, because it's all very good reporting, over the past year, but that really means nothing. But if people know what they're currently being exposed to, then that becomes a massive point of pressure for an organisation to improve. So yeah, I think that is where public health awareness can really be done.
Yes, Greg.
Sorry, yeah, just is that's a great question. I think one of the things we do have to understand is that air quality will vary considerably between locations, and therefore it has to be comparative in terms of not just what's in the external air, but how the systems are set up, how they're ventilated. Is it naturally ventilation? Is it simple mechanical ventilation? Is it complicated ventilation systems with fan coil units or whatever may be at the end of it, retreating the air? Because all those would have effect in either primarily recirculating the air or secondarily recirculating the air, and it's getting an understanding of the whole system and therefore what can be achieved. One thing I would say is, while the discussion certainly has progressed significantly since COVID, in well-managed, well-maintained buildings, our experience is that air quality on the whole is very, very good. And just to give you an example of that, in terms of looking at things like filtration efficiencies, from particles from 0.5 microns up to 5 microns, you're looking at 60 to 90% reductions on that found outside. Bearing in mind that is the benchmark under the Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare regulations, that it is as good as or better than. You're looking with regards to supply air in terms of total inhalable and total respirable dust levels, significantly reduced on the whole, microbiological levels down. Some of those other elements, such as carbon dioxide, of course, is more affected with regards to occupation. And certainly one of the problems that was occurring increasingly prior to COVID was the sophistication of occupancy levels and understanding how many people you could get into an area versus how good the ventilation system was, because often you could overcrowd an area from a ventilation perspective, but from a desk perspective have huge amounts of people in the office, and that again caused an issue. The ventilation was never considered as being a factor in looking at that.
Thank you, Greg. I think you've brought us firmly into the arena of what FMs can do and what good looks like in this particular arena. You've mentioned some legislation around dealing with that, and some benchmarking. Lewis, what are you looking at? What does good look like in your setup?
I think a number of things, but it all comes down to kind of doing the basic things right. And Greg's, talked eloquently about ventilation, about having that adequate fresh air and that mechanical support as well. I guess that needs to be balanced as well. Ventilation can be good, but if that's natural ventilation and you're next to, say, an artery road and you're a school, then that's not necessarily a good thing. It starts to become counterproductive. So you need that mechanical support, and whether that's a good HVAC system in place, but the airflow as well needs to be balanced as well. So you're managing and preventing the buildup of indoor pollutants at the same time as well. Well, that same kind of conversation comes down to the kind of filtration and purification part of it as well. So having a good system, but ensuring that you've got the right filters in place. So HEPA filters are a very good place to start to capture some of the things like airborne particles, dust, pollen. I know I suffer from hay fever badly, so these things are really positive for me. And then accompanied by kind of more newer technologies such as UVs as well. I guess as well, Katie talked about the kind of reacting to things and being able to spot things, and that goes back to that kind of real-time and continuous monitoring. So sensors are a really good place to start. So having those key parameters such as CO2, PM2.5, VOCs, but having those sensors so it's smart, so it is alerting your FM manager or your building manager, or even if it's even smarter and, you know, notifying someone like a teacher or a doctor like Katie in her position. So there are a couple of things, but I think as well, going back to that kind of doing basics right, it's around maintaining your equipment, so preventing all of the bad build-up by having a good maintenance and preventive maintenance and inspection scheme in place as well. There are kind of a few things that I'd agree on.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned Katie and some of the areas that she needs to pay attention to. So Katie, I'd like to come to you about what good looks like really from your patient recovery perspective, well, your perspective as a health person working in the hospital setting.
It's a bit difficult to answer that one, to be honest, because I think the awareness amongst healthcare professionals is actually really low about the day-to-day effects of our workspaces. So it's not something that is generally part of the conversation. And me, with my background and my interests, I'm sort of aware increasingly of the impacts that it has on children. And the things that concern me really are, so if anyone's familiar with North Middlesex Hospital, it's situated literally right next to the North Circular Road in London, which is one of the busiest and most polluted roads. And we have people turning up here who might have, they might be turning up with an asthma attack, and they're turning up literally to our hospital and probably being exposed to extremely high levels of atmospheric pollution as they enter the building. Or maybe they're coming to an asthma clinic, and ironically, they're being exposed to all of this as they enter, that we try and that we're trying to manage their health condition that we're actually making worse. So I'm sorry, could you remind me of your question? I've got a little bit sidetracked with my enthusiasm for talking about children with respiratory conditions.
No, we were talking about what good looks like and what
Yeah.
look like in terms of benchmarking for hospitals, etc.
Yeah.
It's clearly linked to patient outcomes, as you were just mentioning.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, in terms of that, it would be directly linking it to patient outcomes. So we did do a little bit of work a while ago looking at our asthma admissions and correlating those with local air pollution levels, and we found there was very strong correlation between those days. So it would be good to see that the hospital was actually taking account of that and challenging local authorities on air pollution and the standards that we accept in our local environment. Thank you.
Now, Greg and Lewis, I'd like to come back to you two, because we spoke about what good looks like from an FM perspective in terms of, you know, adjusting the monitoring, and we'll come back to some monitoring. There's also a question that we got from the audience on monitoring, but we'll deal with that a little bit later. So we know what good looks like. What are the challenges for the profession to get us there? You know, what are the key challenges for FMs to achieve better air quality? Lewis?
I think there are a number of challenges. It'd probably be remiss if I didn't say the elephant in the room, which is budgetary constraints. It's something that is across the board, public and private sector. So balancing the cost of air quality with overall kind of sustainability budgets is a really big challenge. A lot of the properties that we look after as well, they have aging infrastructure as well, including HVAC systems. So when you're talking about potentially doing retrofitting for better air quality as well, things don't fit together. So that kind of technological integration is a big challenge. Occupation density as well, as you say, you know, recovering back from COVID, we don't use spaces like we used to as well. And doing things broad brush is a really expensive way to treat things like air quality. So responding to that new way of occupying spaces is a really, really big challenge as well. And the other part as well is around the energy efficiency trade-off, which we touched on the point at the start of the webinar, about how actually sometimes treating air quality can lead to more carbon. So it's about having to look at these things in an overall perspective. But yeah, lastly as well, and it seems to be a kind of a bit of a common theme, is the awareness and education around the topic. It's still, we are very much in the elementary stage of this conversation, even though it's a bit of an old conversation. So yeah, a couple of things there.
I think from a clinical perspective, some challenges that are specific to me as a paediatrician working in an emergency department is that it can be so dynamic what we're asked to deal with. Obviously, we can't ever shut our doors no matter how busy we are. So sometimes we might have only 20 children in the department. Sometimes we might have 100 children in the department. So obviously that makes a big difference in terms of the capacity of the filtration systems to manage the potential burden of infectious diseases. And just at the moment, we're dealing with a double epidemic. We've got an epidemic of measles and we've got an epidemic of whooping cough, both of which we've had exposure events within our departments, and potential future epidemics or pandemics when they arise. How do we actually respond to that with being able to deliver the emergency care that we need to within a fixed environment?
Thank you. Greg, I know you will have something to add.
Don't always, sorry. Yeah, I think it's primarily it's looking at the information and the requirements already placed upon us, and with regards to air quality, it is covered relatively extensively. I mentioned previously Workplace Health Safety and Welfare Regs Regulation 6. Control of Substance Hazardous to Health Regulations covers a number of areas, and that under it has a document called EH40, which looks at occupational exposure values for it's hundreds of different compounds. Carbon monoxide is in there, carbon dioxide is in there, lots of volatile organic compounds are in there. Specifics for environments such as workshops and wood dust would be covered, where they all have levels, which you would need to audit against from a legal perspective. That is one element. There's then taking that slightly further in terms of looking at total inhalable, total respirable dusts. What systems, as both Lewis and I have touched on, do you have in place, and what is a reasonable expectation from them with the way they're set up in terms of filtration, in terms of fan speeds, in terms of tempering, humidifying the air? Does that have any secondary or tertiary systems associated with it? So if you've got any local recirculation, that will have an effect on what's going on locally, not just what's coming out of the main supply system. And then comparing those with what's going on with the circulating air environment and how that is being used. Because again, we've seen with occupancy levels, or if you have an area where I don't know, you've got a print shop. So the classic example in my mind is where you've got perhaps a photocopier station or a printer station, where locally that you will see increases in particularly dust levels associated with the operation of those. And having some baseline information to say this is where we are now, this is what we can reasonably achieve, and then using that to determine what you want your policy and strategy to be. And then managing on that basis by setting targets. Certainly, the use of monitors around the property will help with regards to that targeting, but we do real-time physical monitoring. We will actually go around and cover all these at the same when we're doing it. And one of the other checks there is making sure that the units are properly sited and they're calibrated, because where you put a permanently sited unit, if it's in a corner of an office, what you may be achieving in the corner of the office may not be relevant or realistic to what's being achieved elsewhere.
We'll come back actually and explore that a little
Sorry.
further about where monitors best placed, etc. in a moment. But all three of you touched around kind of the dynamic needs and the post-pandemic ways of working. And I would like to delve into that a little bit deeper, because, you know, either you've got fixed appliances or there are now more modular solutions. But in any case, you know, how are you in working with your clients to organize more flexible air quality provision that deals with the, well, not just occupant awareness, but the density, the ventilation management that is in place, whether that's fixed or not, because I'd like to follow through a little bit on that, because that's really quite different. How do you deal with things like zoning, etc.? So to go back to the overall question, how do you organize more flexible air quality provision within this context of new working?
I think it is about using data, I guess. And a lot of the sensors that we have now have that occupancy thing attached to it. So we can understand and start to build up what meeting rooms are used on certain days, what common areas are used on certain days, and those sorts of things are allowing us to tackle that problem, I guess. It's not always just from an air quality perspective. Sometimes it's from a heating point of view as well, to try and save energy, but it does have that benefit alongside it. Some of the solutions, we've got our own kind of solution that we use, which has occupancy as well as air quality parameters that is recording alongside it. So that's given us that data to kind of react to that. But yeah, it's a huge challenge. I mean, zone-based air quality management is the kind of aspiration, I guess, and giving people that, empowering people to make those decisions and to change the environment that they're working in. But again, as I mentioned, it is an aspiration. It's a really complicated and yeah, moving beast, I guess.
Well, I guess you've just touched onto something that we saw in our roundtable discussion as well, around levels of control that you give to people. Because especially where people have been working at home, they can either just open the window and they can make it comfortable for them. When they are in the office, that's not always possible. And I know that monitors can help with that. But what is the current trend around handing back control to people in their workplaces around, I guess, not just air quality, but its temperature is intimately linked with that.
Temperature is, and it's the biggest single dissatisfier for most occupants with regards to temperature. But again, we're all different, and you can have an office temperature of 22 degrees C that would be within spec for the air handling unit, that would meet all the guidance, and one person may find it a little bit too cold and somebody else may find it a little bit too hot. I think it's having that flexibility, and it's back to the proposition you have for the employers to say, you know, our ventilation system is designed to perform between 21 and 23 degrees C, and we will endeavour to achieve that over the period of the working day, however long it may be. And I will come back to that one with regards to utilisation in your question, Sophie. If you're too hot, you're too cold, and actually the building's performing within that spec, then we're going to say, put a jacket on or take a jacket off to make yourself more comfortable. If it's outside that, we will adjust it to get it back in then, and that needs to be the proposition. It needs to work both ways. With regards to utilisation, yeah, ultimately being able to dynamically change your air handling system to accommodate for that. If you have nobody in, everybody's left an area, and the sensors can pick it up and locally isolate that compared with the rest of the building, would be great. But there are, I hate to hazard a guess, Lewis, I'd say maybe 7% optimistically of buildings would have the ability to do that currently.
Yeah.
So that may be something for the future when you're redesigning and respecking. Where you can do it, look at how you're reoccupying the building. You know, where are you sending? Do you need to go back to the same desk every day if you've got one person? Well, it was like the pre-COVID days where you had 8 people who'd come in on a Saturday. They'd all be sat on 3 different floors, and the air handling unit would be running at 100% fresh air. To cater for all of them, where there was never a consideration, and now it actually is, where people are thinking a little bit more. If you're going to come in out of hours, where the system may be racking down in terms of energy use, do they all go and work in one particular area? That then you can specifically control that area, but leave the rest of the building in a phase ready for when it becomes reoccupied.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of user control, I work in an NHS hospital, and it seems like the heating goes on in October and off in May, and there's 2 settings, either on or off. That's it. So you know, a future in which we can control air quality dynamically seems a distant dream, but hopefully not too far off. What I think would be really useful to see in the short term is conversations which include 3 parties, which is the clinicians, the infection control teams, and the facilities management team. I think those 3 groups rarely come in the same forum, but actually they're the key people that you need to have the discussion and to start moving things forward.
I agree.
Thank you, Katie. That's a question answered that I had already. Brilliant. Kind of, Lewis, you've mentioned cost before as well. And actually, Katie, you've just mentioned a few people who you need to start influencing as well, beyond the FM team and their superiors. But who are the key stakeholders to influence for the business case? You know, what are the good ROI return considerations?
Yeah, I can have a go. I guess, yeah, the FM team is the obvious key stakeholder there, but it's not just them. It's working with the clinicians, it's working with your HR wellbeing teams, it's the trust estates directors, for example, within the NHS setting. There's undercover, well, kind of less known ones as well, I guess. So the IT and cyber teams. So when we try to implement monitoring and measurement systems, actually one of the biggest hurdles that we have is trying to get these things signed off and make sure that they're safe, make sure the data's contained. So yeah, there's a couple of kind of key stakeholders in terms of building a business case. In terms of ROI, return on investment, again, there's a number of different measures, but it can, if done right, reduce energy costs. You've got productivity gains. It's a bit hard to measure, I guess, but I'm sure there are methods out there to do that. Regulatory compliance as well, as things start to progress, ensuring that that's a measure of investment as well. If your ESG credentials are improving, as well as things like asset value as well. So lots of different ways, I think.
I'd like to include as stakeholders, patients and public using our spaces. So, for example, we've had multiple events recently of children becoming infected with measles while they were in the emergency department for something else, and that's been traceable. So, you know, if we can actually link that to air quality or the poor air quality that we've not been able to provide for those children, I think you start to generate quite a lot of pressure from parents and the public to improve what you're providing.
Thank you. And from my side, I'm duty bound to mention our return on workplace investment report that is available on our website, because air quality is absolutely seen as a big feature there to drive up concentration around tasks, etc. And there is a business case approach that is outlined in there to help quantify some of the benefits around that, Lewis. That's an answer to your question. Brilliant. Now, we've had lots of mentioning around monitoring and wider technical requirements. So let's go there completely, fully, no holding back there. What are the key tools for consideration that you think our audience should have in place to deliver on it? It being air quality.
I'm happy to start there. I think is making sure that what you are specifying is a tool that's good to do the job. Is again, it's going to come back to cost. We saw this hugely over COVID, where CO2 was used as a marker, and the quality of monitors you can get, not always cost dependent, but we were doing like for like comparisons versus an instrument that was calibrated to a UCAS standard. And we were getting, in some instances, differences of 2 or 3 parts per million. So when you're looking at CO2 levels of 600, 700, 800, 1,010 parts per million, that's no discernible difference at all. To others where we were getting 50 or 80% differences. If you're reading 800 and you've got a unit that's reading 1,600, that is identifying a problem that may not occur. So it's making sure that what you've got is good to do the job. The second one is making sure that where you're citing them is relevant to the workplace environment. Often they will get squirreled away, or they will be put in places that don't adequately reflect the environment. But making sure that they're checked on a regular basis, that the information you're getting back and what you're going to do with that information once you've got it, because it's no good just recording the data and leaving it somewhere. It's how are you going to publish that, and how are you going to engage with the occupier or the end user on what those results are like. As I've said, from our perspective, air quality, particularly indoor air quality, certainly the buildings we're looking at, is on the whole very, very good. I mean, substantially better than that found outside, are meeting all the legal requirements. Yet again, people are loath to proactively publish that. and I think maybe now's the time that you should start doing that. It is a good news story. Maybe not all the time, and perhaps that's part of the problem. That, oh yeah, but what happens on the times it isn't? Well, it's like anything else. You do something about it. There is often solutions for it. So it's making sure that you've got your data that is then turned into information that you can use to say yes, it is good, or no, it isn't. That we need to do something about it. That you could then provide that as knowledge through to the occupants to say this is how we are performing, and it also will vary.
I think you've given a really good kind of summation of some of the important bits, including how important it is for the business case as well, monitoring that is, and having sensors in place, because it's translating data then into information that you need to know. There was actually a question in relation to that from Stephen Watts around monitoring air quality and publishing the results. Is it usual for employers to monitor air quality if the results may not be what they want to see?
You can't always guarantee good results. That would be the same with anything. If you look at water quality monitoring, if you look at comfort, if you look at monitoring your ppms, not everything runs at 100%. Good health and safety is often a sine curve. You have times when it's very good and times it changes, it fluctuates. It's something that happens on an ongoing basis, but it's knowing what to do as and when those changes start to occur. Then you can make incremental changes that will offset that and often flatten out the bottom of the curve. So it's not always going to be 100%, but publishing the information and having that is no bad thing, and often helps to actually breeding trust with the employers, rather than everybody knows everything's not always rosy in the garden. And there could be reasons for that. On if it's a very cold, wet day, in terms of your ambient air, the levels of dusts in that air are significantly reduced compared to a very warm, well, the period we had 2 or 3 weeks ago, when it was very, very warm, it was dry, and there was a wind blowing. Dust levels in that would have been significantly different. They would have gone up astronomically compared to what they normally were, just because of the external environmental conditions.
Lewis,
If I could just touch on that part about reporting as well. So I don't think sustainability reporting shouldn't be comfortable, but the more transparent you are with whatever the outcome is, the better outcome for all, I guess. We're starting to see development from an EU perspective in CSRD, where we're having to pinpoint and report a lot more of our sustainability metrics. So if air quality, indoor or out air quality, is material to you as a business, whether that's you have an impact on that or likewise, then you'll have to publish it. So I think although it's not commonplace now, going in the future, you'll see things like air quality being published. If you look at an airport, for example, airports have been publishing things around air quality, particularly outdoor air quality, for a number of years. So I think that's set to continue.
thank you. Can we talk a little bit more about the placement and the regularity of testing? Because there's no point in putting monitors that check air quality at the ceiling. Where do you, Lewis, perhaps I'll pick up with you to begin with again.
I'm happy for Greg to take this one. I think this is Greg's bucket.
Okay.
It would depend, and some of it, to be honest, will be trial and error. It will be about putting a unit in and then maybe moving it around based against what other measurements you are taking. So some real-time physical monitoring at the same time. On the ceiling, as you said, is not good. Equally, on a desk pod where 6 people are relatively close to it, you will find will tend to go the other way. It'll constantly be flagging for CO2 because you've got a lot of people very close to it. So it needs to be somewhere which is representative of the environment, and it could be that you need to move it around 2 or 3 times before you find that perfect position.
And I've had a question here as well from Brendan around conducting air samples, and he takes them from the supply and extract systems in the premises. Any other places?
you would need to, any air sampling strategy would need to look at where your fresh air is coming in, because obviously that will identify a fresher intake at ground level poses different challenges to a fresher intake level at maybe the 24th floor of a building. But that's your raw material coming in. How then that is treated by whatever air handling you've got. How that is then, what effect the supply system, if any, is having on that, so to the air actually being delivered into the occupied space in the circulating air, could be looked at. In terms of extract monitoring, it's not something we do. It's something I suppose you could look at, because often with extract, it's going to be an agglomeration of what's come out, including within the circulating air environment as well, which also has its own influence. So certainly levels of particulate. So if you're looking at dust levels, you're looking at microbiological levels, supply air, fresh air and supply air at points in the system. Also recognizing you may have secondary units on that will have an influence that you will need to take into account of, is important. And then also circulating air for aspects such as total inhalable, total respirable dusts. Some of your gases, such as your VOCs, which will be internally generated, carbon dioxide, which will be internally generated, and then maybe carbon monoxide as a marker for what's coming in from the outside.
We've got quite a few questions coming in, to be honest. So I think we better focus on some of that for the remaining time, which I'm very conscious is going to a close. How do you believe that individual building facility managers can be encouraged to prioritize air quality of their aging and newer properties? Who wants to have a stab at that?
I'm happy to have a go. I guess it's a difficult one, because it's a developing topic and it's not something that everyone knows about or is prioritizing. But if you can bolt it onto other areas such as carbon or energy efficiency, or demonstrate it that it has a financial return on investment as well, is a good way to do it as well. And also understanding what the priorities are of your building users. So for a hospital example, that's probably very obvious. But if you engage with your workforce, say it's an office workspace, and the feedback is that this is something that's material and it is something that affects my day, then I think that builds a business case on its own. But it has to have that engagement back with the building users and that feedback to elevate the conversation.
There is a related question here around quick fixes, but then really more looking at the M&E side of things, and what can they get their M&E contractors to look at today in first instance to fix things.
Oh, we've got I was just going to reiterate, go back to the point Lewis made, actually, with regards to your buildings. Your first step has got to be finding out from a qualitative perspective what your air quality is like now for the environment you've got, and then using that as the benchmark or the baseline to go back to the organisation and say, this is where we are. Are you happy with it? Are you not happy with it? And if you're not happy with it, what are the solutions available to improve it? And that will then start the discussion. With regards to the M&E side of things, don't go changing your filters on a more regular basis. It's one of the huge misconceptions we also see, is that if we change our filters very regularly, that's improving air quality. No, it's not. Filters, like anything, will take a time to reach optimum performance, and they will operate for a period of time at that optimum performance, where what they're collecting is more than what is coming out of the back of them into the airstream. There will come a point where they will become overloaded, and for every particle that goes in, you may be pushing 2 or 3 out the back. That's the point you don't want to reach. But you want to get somewhere maybe 10% shy of that, where you're changing your filters, because if you change your filters too frequently, in actual fact, your air quality will dip, because those filters haven't reached their optimum level of loading, so they're letting slightly more through than a well-fitted, well-maintained, well-specified filter would be in place. But also be aware of the performance of your air handling unit, in terms of what level of filter and therefore what level of air quality you will look to achieve, because you do need to look at the system in terms of your fan speeds, etc., and what can be achieved, or what level of filter you need.
Thank you, Greg. There's quite a few questions that have come in, and we're obviously not going to have the time now to answer them, but we'll try and take them away and see if we can follow up in writing and publish a little news item in the near future. I just want to go quickly around the panel for like 30 seconds. What is the one thing that you would like to change for air quality possibly now? What is the one tip? And Katie, can I start with you, please?
I would like to see a big public health awareness campaign about the effects of air pollution on short-term and long-term health. Small ask.
Small ask, but frankly, as a professional body that can drive up competences and awareness, I think.
Yeah, I mean, awareness amongst professionals and amongst the general public, I think, is sorely needed.
Lewis?
I guess mine's a simple one, really. I think a simple fix or a simple way to elevate this topic is to add it as an agenda item on your sustainability interactions. So we see carbon, waste, water, social value, but air quality doesn't sit there usually. So simple one, just add it to your agenda if you are interacting with your client, FM provider, whoever it may be, supplier.
Great. Greg?
Mine will be if you're currently not monitoring your air quality, get an accredited, get somebody who understands what they're doing to provide an initial assessment for you and find out actually what yours is. For those people who are already doing it, start to engage with your management and your employees about what you're achieving and how you can identify what you're achieving, because again, I suppose the slight negative is that we're talking about air pollution, and pollution has a negative connotation in that as pollution. It's not always the case, and there are a lot of facilities and workplace managers out there doing a really good job with regard to something like air quality and just not promoting it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the biggest problem is it's invisible.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to have to leave it at that. I really would love to thank our panel for a very engaging conversation. Thank you, Katie, Lewis, and Greg. And thank you to our listeners for being really active in the question asking. We will try and follow up with you. A recording will be available, so you can share that with colleagues if you want, or if you want to listen again. And thank you very much to our webinar support team that make today happen. We do have this roundtable report available that gives you a little bit more information. It also contains some signposting at the back end. One thing we didn't talk about today were things like the WELL standard or BREEAM. All of those things, they're covered in there as part of the signposting. Now, Greg already mentioned it earlier, but we also have our sustainability survey still in field. It doesn't close until Tuesday, the 10th of September. So please, now is your opportunity to still engage with it. We've got some really good engagement numbers, but we want to go over the 500 and we need your help to get there. So please fill this out. We will be using it afterwards to issue guidance on really where investment should be, what the return time on investment should be, and so forth. So it's going to feed into really helpful tools. And then last but not least, our next episode, well, CPD number, but also our next episode is scheduled for the 25th of September, when we will be seeking to demystify Section 156 of the Building Safety Act. Thank you all, and until next time.
Thanks all.